Okay, let's run.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it.
It's a quest. It's a quest for fun.
Well, The Rock says, why don't we just cut right to the chase?
Okay, now he wants to get together. Well, he wants to talk.
I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me.
It's showtime, folks!
What are you?
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to And I Quote, the weekly show where we introduce you to content creators of all shapes and sizes that join us from any and all corners of the nerd universe. We find out more about them by taking your questions. I am your host, Ryan of Nerd Culture, and our guest on this episode is indie author and artist extraordinaire. Please welcome Andrew Hiller. Andrew, welcome in. How are you, good sir?
Hi, Ryan. I'm doing great. How are you today?
Doing well, doing well. We thank you for being with us. Now, if you have any questions for Andrew Hiller as we go throughout the course of this episode, by all means, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the chat. Our producer is going to be keeping an eye on it as we go throughout the course of this program. And don't forget to like and share this with everyone you know. With any further ado, Andrew, what would you say were some of your favorite books or writers growing up?
So I always answer this question beginning at the beginning. And my very favorite first book was Harold and the Purple Crayon, which was a little children's book about a boy who has a purple crayon, and whatever he drew on the wall or on the floor suddenly came to life. And so if he got nervous, all of a sudden he'd be in the ocean because he'd be drawing waves. And if there were waves, well, then he would have to draw himself a ship so he wouldn't drown. And if there were a ship, he might have to go fishing. So, of course, there would wind up being sharks. As I got older, I started moving into epic fantasies, things like the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant and David Eddings. More recently, Piranesi. I've absolutely fallen in love, and I just finished the second book on a preview read of Joe Miles' recent series, which is this amazing, cozy, economic activist labor space opera thing. And it's just quite brilliant in the way it takes care of characters and looks at corporations, looks at individuals, looks at multiculturalism and all sorts of other vectors.
Fascinating. Interesting stuff. We thank you for sharing that with us. I think one of those titles that you mentioned, the one with the color, with the crown, and stuff, I think that may have come across my desk once or twice, if I remember correctly. I have to go back and think on it a little bit more, but that may have come across my desk at one point or another when I was a youngling. I'm not sure, but hey, you never know. What would you say were some of your favorite movies or TV series growing up?
So I'll start with the obvious because I'm of that age. Mm-hmm. Star Wars and Princess Bride sort of really shaped me. I was one of the people who every year the entire family would come on because it would come once a year on, and we would watch Wizard of Oz to the point that we probably could sing all the songs together, and we could even quote a bunch of the lyrics almost like in a Rocky Horror fashion. Even though there were no VHS tapes, we were just watching it on TV once a year, we still learned it well enough. So, but, we go to that. We go to probably Moulin Rouge is a movie that I thought was really spectacular. And so many. The big problem with lists, and I bet you've had this when the questions turned on you, is you're always like, ooh, I forgot that one. That one's important. How could I not say that one? So I will say that if you asked me this question tomorrow, you'd probably get a different list. But they'd all be special movies. There's so many brilliant creators out there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It varies from time to time. Sometimes if you ask me on a certain day, I may have 5 for you, and then the next day I could think of 5 more that I missed, the day before. So it's good because there's so many movies out there, and everyone has different tastes and different things that appeal to them respectively. So yeah, but good picks though. I'm familiar with a lot of those. I never heard anybody. So it's all good. When did you decide to become a writer?
So I was working in a third-rate art gallery, the kind of place that sells bowls of fruit and James Dean and Elvis sitting at the Last Supper dinner table. And one of my friends invited me to a theater. It was a theater in Virginia, Theater of the Second Amendment. And I go to this play. And the play was truly awful. It didn't have to be awful, but it had like 12 ideas and never chose one to focus on. And I looked at it and I was walking out and said, well, if that can get produced, I can write something. And so I went back to my job and smuggled in a laptop. And while people weren't in the shop, I wrote my first play, which was called Stripes on the Wall Going 75. Stripes on the Wall was about an artist who could never sell anything, not even caricature, until he gets in an auto wreck. And when he gets in the auto wreck, he wakes up in the state of a regressed 6-year-old. And as soon as the art world finds out that he's legitimately insane, they want everything he's ever made. And as he recovers, he has to decide, is it better to stay insane in this regressed state and have everything I ever wanted but not appreciate it, but recover and possibly lose it all? And so that was the first piece of fiction that I wrote that got produced, and it wound up going on in, I think, about 6 or 7 theaters around the country. But that was the start professionally.
Ah, very good, very good. What would you say are some of the biggest rewards about being a writer?
So I'm going to stay with theater for a second because it's easiest. So when that first show came on, the very first one, I got there probably a half hour to 45 minutes before curtain. And I see the custodians come in, sweeping and mopping. And I start getting nervous because their jobs are dependent on how well my play does. Then I see the stage manager, I see the lighting tech, I see the audio tech, and I get more nervous because same thing. I see the actors trickle in, and at this point, I probably have lost several shades of color on my face, and I can feel my heart going, thump, thump, thump. And by the time the curtain rises, by the time the audience has come in, it's about 2/3 full house, I probably look like I need to visit an ER room. And then about 30 seconds into the show, there's the first laugh line, and the audience laughs. And everything melts away. And then a little bit after that, I hear a sigh from the audience. And I'm like, they're living in my world. They're escaping, they're enjoying, they're thinking, they're a part of something I created. And there was this rush of not just catharsis, but exhilaration. And then I'll stop this part of the story with my favorite part of any kind of art. This is books, this is comics, this is movies, this is theater. When the show ended and I left and no one knew who I was, I started hearing people talk about it and sort of wrestle with themselves about, well, what did this mean? Or, oh, I really like this part. And what do you think happens to these characters after the show? And I started realizing that for me, the sign of good art, not to be immodest, but the sign of good art is when the curtain drops, the conversation starts. And in some respect, that's what we're doing today. We're saying, we love art. Let's give it a second life. Let's imbibe it with our own spirit and our own love and the things about it which made us excited, which made us thrilled, or confused us, or made us giggle.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. And yeah, that's one of the best things about some piece of art is that it gets people talking. Conversations are happening all over the place, whether it's at the venue that it's being played or displayed at, depending on how you look at it, or they're talking about it when they're in their cars on the way home.
Yeah.
That's a sign of, hey, we've done something here. We got a conversation started. That's what we wanted. So
Yeah, and it doesn't even really matter if the viewer, reader, audience, listener is wrong, or at least if their interpretation is different from yours. Because once it leaves your pen, it is recreated in the audience's mind, and how they filter it through their experience, through their philosophy, through who they are, makes it something new. And so, from that perspective, my statement was wrong because they almost can't be wrong, except for, of course, when they really are, when they really miss the boat, when they decide to interject some political silliness or something.
right, right. Well, what else is amazing is this episode of Van Dyke Quote that you may be watching or listening to right now with our guest on this episode, Andrew Hiller. If you have any questions for him, by all means, let us know in the comments, let us know in the chat. Don't forget to like and share this episode with everyone you know. And if this is your first time with us, we thank you for being here. Couldn't do it without you. Flip side of the coin, though, what are the biggest challenges about being a writer?
So, the hardest thing about being the writer, I would say, are two things. The first is the obvious. The first is developing the calluses you get from rejections, from the people who choose not to love your work and who don't want to put it on shelves, who don't want to put it before the audience. The second thing that I think is really hard is knowing when to stop editing, because you can refine your piece forever. You can keep sharpening, you can keep adding details, you can keep cutting, you can keep doing anything you want to. But at some point, if you keep doing that, one of two things is going to happen. One, no eyes or ears will ever find your work. Or two, you'll create mud, because in all that perfection, you've lost the soul of what you wanted to write, and it loses that quality, which makes it wonderful. I do think every story needs to have polish, but also whatever was that core, whatever was that rawness that brought you to the idea in the first place.
Excellent. Excellent points. Excellent points. Really, really good stuff, and very valid as well. Very, very valid. Now, on the other side, or a different side of the fence here, you're an artist. So, what are the rewards or challenges about being an artist?
Well, I think the big reward for being an artist is making the art. It's getting lost in composition, getting lost in color, having that tactile sense, which takes you away mentally from so much of your stress and just absorbing yourself into whatever you're doing. In the case of the art that you've seen at conventions that we've both been a part of, what I've been doing is a lot of sort of humorous mashups. So I'm making little one-picture comic strips. And when people get the joke, and when they stop by my table and they just start spontaneously laughing, and I get to say, "Oh, which one?" And we start having a conversation. And maybe it leads to an anecdote about how they've related to a character that I've drawn. That's pretty cool. So it's the creation. And again, I guess this is a recurring theme. It's the response. It's what happens after the creation gets into the hands of the people out there.
That's very true. That's very true. What advice would you give to somebody who is aspiring to become a writer or an artist?
So do it for love, I think, first, because I think it goes without saying that this is an industry in which you're going to get more rejection than you do acceptance, especially at the beginning, unless you are phenomenally lucky. And it doesn't always have to do, unfortunately, with merit. So make sure that what you work on, especially initially, is a story that makes you laugh, that makes you think, that makes you want to research every aspect of it, makes you daydream. And when you're not writing it, you're eager to start writing it again. And then the next piece of advice I would really give is, once you get to the stage where you feel somewhat comfortable with your writing, get beta readers. Get beta readers in the business, get beta readers who are massive readers of your genre. Then get some readers who are readers outside your genre who don't know the tropes, who don't know how a science fiction story is supposed to work, who don't know the steps of your thriller or your fantasy story, or why a robot will suddenly, this is sort of a 50-year-old thing that no longer happens, but a squirt gun will take out your killer robot, you know? So all the things that we've stored in our heads, you and I, Ryan, from watching and reading 20, 30 years of science fiction, goes into our expectations every time we open a book in that genre. And so we sort of are an easy ride for that writer. But for the person you want to introduce to the field, they don't have that knowledge. Like, I'll talk about something that I don't know that I should because it's not sold yet. I'm working on a children's picture book. And the children's picture book came from an event which happened to a friend, which you've probably seen or experienced. Basically, they got a new puppy, and the puppy tackled them and started licking them to death. They were just, going crazy with the tongue, right? And I looked at that and I thought to myself, the lycanthrope. Now, I see you looking, and I'm not sure if you're amused or you're thinking dad joke, maybe both. But for you and I, the lycanthrope needs no explainer, because we hear that and we automatically understand lycanthrope. There is a large part of the world for whom the word lycanthrope has no context. It has no meaning, because they're not part of that history. They haven't read those books. They haven't watched those movies or TV shows. So you have to, within your book, cater to those who don't know what you're writing and those who do, and satisfy both.
Very good points. And the reason I was kind of laughing and reacting the way I did was because I was thinking of lycanthrope when you said the first one. So I was like, I'm starting to get it. It's starting to click in the back of my mind. So there you go. That was my reaction. So I do have some things I'd like to share with you here, if you don't mind. So we have this here, a halo of mushrooms. How did this all come about, and what is it exactly?
So two slightly different stories, and tell me when I get overly verbose, because as you can tell, I talk. I was working at a radio station, a news radio station, and I had been assigned 6 or 7 stories in a row that to me felt like the same thing. I was asked to look at a drought in Madagascar. I was asked to look into the Greek economic crisis. I was asked to look into a weather event in California. And I started thinking about all these places around the world, disconnected, that were dealing simultaneously with scarcity and had to figure out how to adapt to it. And I thought to myself, well, I want to talk about this, but I don't want to preach, and I don't want to scream, and I don't want to be holier than thou and pretend I know a lot more than I know. And so I said, fantasy is my outlet. Analogy is my outlet. So I created the story, A Halo of Mushrooms, which is about a healer who steals one of the last mushrooms from the first fairy ring in order to try to find an environment to transplant it and regrow lost kindness back into the world. And then the question becomes, how far would you go to do it, and who's going to oppose you? The opposition is pretty easy. The opposition are those who want the power for themselves, so those who would consume it, those who want to hoard it to make sure no one else gets the power, but it's still theirs. And then the third group is those who want to obliterate the resource, hoping that what it's gone will come up with a new solution. Evolution will replace it. So those are sort of the bad guys. Those are sort of, or at least the bad guys' motivations. And then the flip side of that question, where I began, was, well, how far would you go to make the world a kinder place? What would you risk to lower the temperature of the way people talk in social media or in your daily lives, or reduce bullying, or bring back please and thank you, if that's, or however we define kindness, and genuine kindness, not sort of the superficial stuff? And when would you say, too far, I'm going to let grumpitude win? I'm going to let those who are angry win. And so I wrote A Halo of Mushrooms in a really epic fantasy style, taking me from the Great Lakes to California, ending up in Africa and Malawi, as he's going around trying to figure out how to find a place to plant the mushroom, how to find a mechanism that allows him to, because the mushroom resists itself to being planted. And I think I can say this without spoiling anything. And part of that is because he's trying to restore kindness. And kindness isn't a one-way street. Kindness isn't something that exists between you and yourself. And so that's part of the story as well. And then all sorts of goofiness and silliness, because as you know, Ryan, I have my experience working with the Muppets, and I've done my very silliness. So everything I do is sort of wedded with humor and wedded with lightness, even though I'm getting all maudlin and serious in this conversation.
Well, that is truly extraordinary. Congratulations on that book. That is a great story. And yes, paying it forward, being kind to others, showing respect for others. I mean, all the craziness that's going on in the world right now, especially with stuff that's going on overseas and even here in our own backyard of the US of A. This sounds like an extraordinary story. And if you do get a chance to read it, absolutely let us know what your feelings about it are in the comments or the chat. And once again, we are here with the extraordinary Andrew Hiller here on this episode of And I Quote. Don't forget to like and share this episode with everyone you know. If you have any questions for him, by all means, let us know in the comments, let us know in the chat. Be more than happy to take those as they come in respectively. Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. Now, you mentioned something with the Muppets, Phenomena. So I had to say it. Phenomena. So plus someone sends me the GIF of that every so often, and then I just found this out. This is recent, by the way. I found out that one character, the Phenomena one in the beginning of the show, he has his own Funko Pop now. So if I can find that and put that on my shelf somewhere, that would probably be good, because some people describe me as that person. So yeah, wear a pair of shades and just say Phenomena. There you go. So anything is possible, ladies and gentlemen. Anything is possible. So what has your experience been with the legendary family that is the Jim Henson family and the Muppets and all that stuff? What was your experience like with that?
So I don't know how far back to go. It started in 2006 when Darryl Green of the Washington Redskins wasn't able to complete an interview with me about his Hall of Fame induction for NPR, for WAMU specifically. And I, for the first time, failed to deliver a story for the radio. And I'm calling my boss, I'm calling my producer, and I look across the metro where I'm sitting, the subway where I'm sitting, and I see a poster for the Fantastic World of Jim Henson exhibition. And so I say to my boss, I can't give you Darryl Green, but what about this? And he says, well, sure, but you got to do it immediately because the exhibition's already open. So I call up the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian says, oh, we would love to be on WAMU. We'd love to have this coverage, but you got to come immediately. You got to come tomorrow morning. I'm like, perfect. This works. The reason that was true was because Jane Henson, Jim Henson's widow, was in DC that morning looking over the exhibition, and they wanted me to talk to her. So I spoke with her for about 30 minutes, and she left. And I started interviewing the museum docents. And about a minute into that, I hear this little on the door. So I pause my recorder. The door opens, and Jane peeks her head in, and she says, "Andrew, my daughter's here. Would you mind speaking to her too?" And I was like, my childhood heart is safe. So I spoke to Heather, and then we did the interview. And I spoke to the people with the Jim Henson legacy. And I spoke to the Smithsonian and said, okay, I spoke to the docents, I spoke to Jane and Heather, but it really wouldn't be right to do a Muppet piece without a Muppet. Can you get me a Muppet? And they said, sure. How's Abby Cadabby? And I said, great. And I went home. And I did something I don't do. I decided to be greedy. I called them back and I said, I know we're not supposed to think this way, but I spoke to Jane, I spoke to Heather, I spoke to 2 female docents. Abby Cadabby is also a female voice. It might be nice to have a male voice. Do you think there's a male Muppet I could talk to? And they said to me, well, would you be okay with Dave Goelz, Gonzo the Great? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm thinking, and they warned me that Dave's very busy. So I'm only going to have 5 minutes with him over the phone, just 5 minutes. And they are they're protective of him and his time. So I go down to the studio, we get the phone set up. I talk to Dave, and our 5-minute conversation winds up being 45 minutes. And when I get home, Dave Goelz did something I usually do. He had somehow gotten my email, and he'd sent me a thank you email for the interview before I could to him. And we became pen pals. We started talking back and forth and sharing stories. And after a little while, he comes to me and said, we've been talking. We love those interviews that you did for Metro Connection and WAMU. Would you be willing to live with us for a while? We want to do an homage to Jim Henson. And I said, of course. And I held my little squeal of joy until I was off the phone. And so for a period of time, I went up to New York and I put my hand in the drawer of eyeballs at the Muppet Workshop and sat on the dark crystal throne and talked to Rolly Cruson and Bonnie Erickson, the woman who invented Miss Piggy and Statler and Waldorf, the puppet builder. And then I went to California to interview some of the actors. Then I wrote skits with Jim Lewis, who wrote Muppets in Space. And I did not much. I did very little bit of voice work with them. Yes, I did. All of this for the 2 documentaries, and the 2 documentaries, Going Gonzo for Jim Henson, and then Cobblestone's Jim Henson from A to Zoe, which focused more on the Sesame Street side, with Fran Brill, who was the first female Muppeteer ever hired by Jim Henson. That sort of went on the air and I think went national and then international. And we've been every so often we still write together and we still talk together. And one of the things I can tell you about the Muppets, and I certainly can tell you more stories than you need to know, but is they are who you want them to be. They are sweet, kind, clever, generous people. I haven't met a diva in the Muppet universe yet. At cons, I do sort of the quick version of this. I tell people, how Oscar the Grouch was born, and what Cookie Monster's first job is, or why it took Jim 30 years to hire a female puppeteer, which had nothing to do with sexism. Very quick version of this is producer from WRC TV Channel 4 in Washington came to Jim Henson's high school. Said, "We think puppets work well on TV. Does anyone do puppets?" And Jim Henson lied. He didn't know about puppetry. He wanted to be on TV. But the producer was like, "Great, bring us your stuff over the weekend. We'll do a screen test. We'll see what happens." So he made a mad dash to the local library, got a book on building puppets, stole his mother's coat, a green frock coat, took a pair of ping pong balls, which he cut in half, and invented Kermit. You know that part of the story. So when Jim Henson was doing his Muppet stuff, all the action was above his head. Here's the Muppet, here's the manipulator arm. Now, Jim Henson was 6'2". Frank Oz was 6'1". So they could not find a woman who would be on the screenshot. They were all too tall. The second year Sesame Street, they were convinced that they really needed someone that the girls could directly relate to, someone who wasn't falsetto. So they brought in Fran. Fran was 5'4". The way they solved it, because Fran is shorter than me and I'm short, is they took 8-inch platforms and they glued them onto 1970s basketball shoes. So that's where she's running and walking all around the soundstage on basically stilts until Sesame Street became successful enough that they could design shoes that might not peel off and break her neck any moment. So that is how we got a female into the Muppets, and probably much more about the Muppets than you expected.
Phenomena, yes. I mean, that is, oh my gosh, extraordinary. Just amazing. Amazing. And congratulations on everything that you've done working with them and putting out these documentaries and stuff. You know, in a way, it was right place, right time. Everything just sort of fell into place. You know, you're at you couldn't get one interview. It was, you know, the schedules didn't let, or, you know, the circumstances were somewhat beyond our control, and all of a sudden this opportunity came up and you grabbed at it, you know, because when opportunity knocks, you answer the door.
Yep.
And you just ran right through it and you dominated it, to say the least. I mean, you interviewed members of his family, and God, it's just, oh my gosh, I wish I could have been there with you. I think a lot of people wish they could have been a fly on the wall when these interviews and these documentaries and these things were taking place at a particular place in time.
Oh, and can you imagine? I mean, that writing session, the skull session, where you're just trading jokes with the people who were writing for the Muppets on the TV and for the movies. I mean, and getting them to laugh at your jokes. That was just, it was every moment of it was amazing.
Oh my goodness. You know, I'm not trying, and by the way, this is not in any way, shape, or form a competition, but the only people I've met from the Muppet / Sesame Street family, even though it's all one big family, don't get me wrong. I did meet Steve Whitmire.
Nice.
And he and I had a good conversation. He shared a few little stories with me. He signed my Muppet Treasure Island DVD and Muppet Christmas Carol, because those are two of the ones that I grew up on. And I still enjoy to this day, by the way. I just want to let people know that. And then the second person I met was, unfortunately, this person is no longer with us, but I met them before they passed on, and that's Carol Spinney.
Nice.
And he was, you can tell that he was hurting. You can tell that he was ailing, but he was hanging in there as best he could at that point. He was in a comfortable chair. He had a wrist brace on and things like that, because you could tell he was fragile. He was frail, but he was still cool. He was smiling in the photo. He signed an 8x10 of him standing next to Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch, which of course is the characters that he made famous among everyone who worked on those shows and specials. Don't get me wrong, because it takes a crew to make a dream work. But Carol was nice. Steve Whitmire was a blast. Anytime I see him, I am more than happy to go over to his booth and just hang out with him for a bit, because he's cool. You know? Yeah. He was Kermit for the longest time. So bless both of their hearts. Carol Spinney, who's no longer with us, we miss you, kind sir. And Steve Whitmire's on the con circuit, so if he's in a convention near you, please go ahead and meet him, because he has a nice display at his booth, and he also has stories. So.
And they're great stories.
They are. And some of the stuff he told me when I first met him, he were surprised me. He was like, "Really? That's how it happened, or this how it went?" He's like, "Mm-hmm." Like the things we hear, you never
Well, and
expect.
even silly things like Miss Piggy probably has changed shape and form more than any other character. But the way Miss Piggy came into reality was Jim basically said in one show, "Hey, I need one of the dancing pigs. I need them to talk." And so they had a chorus of dancing pigs and they didn't have time. So Bonnie basically took one of the dancing pigs and sewed a pair of gloves on the top of the hooves, and that became Miss Piggy. And then once they realized she was an important character, they began refining her until she was the diva we know today. But yeah, I mean, it's just how things change and being allowed, being welcomed into their story. And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, because the Sesame Street story and the Muppet story, for those of us of a certain generation, and hopefully most of us, is our story too, because we have a relationship with those characters. They are real to us. And it needs to, so when we get to meet them, it actually bizarrely doesn't shatter the illusion. I can tell that from your reaction, the way you talk about Steve and Carol. It actually enhances what you remember and what you've experienced. So, and what a treat as a creator or as audience.
Yeah, it was extraordinary to me. And the next time I see Steve, I'm going to have him sign my Muppets Take Manhattan and Muppets from Space double feature DVD set. So have him sign that the next time I see him. Or some of the other actors or performers, I should say. The Puppeteers, all that stuff too. So interesting stuff. What else is interesting? This incredible, and I do mean mind-blowing episode of, and I quote, with our guest of honor, Andrew Hiller. Don't forget to like and share this with everyone you know. If you have any questions for him, let us know in the comments, let us know in the chat. If this is your first time here, welcome, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation. My gosh. Oh, we could go all day on the greatness that is Muppets and the Jim Henson family, because it's a family, and it continues to this day. I mean, was it Sesame Street's going on like, what, 50, 60 years old now?
Well, it started in 69, so 54 years?
Still going, too.
Yeah.
And they keep adding new things, too. They keep adding a few new characters that audiences can relate to, especially with, I know one of them that turned a lot of heads and made positive headlines years ago was the introduction of I forget the character name, but it was the one who has autism.
Yeah.
So that one has really made a huge impact because autism impacts a lot of families. So it's nice to have a character like that on the Muppets. And when I saw the character, I'm thinking, because they've had some tapes, and obviously she's been on for a number of years now, but they said, hey, here's a sneak peek of her debut and how she interacts with the other Muppet characters, and Big Bird's there, and he says, well, why isn't she saying anything? And then the human people in Sesame Street are like, well, she has autism, so she communicates in a different way. And Big Bird's confused, like, well, how does that work? And then they go on to explain how it affects her and all that stuff. It's quite extraordinary how they're able to do it. And if I ever get a chance to meet the person who's the puppeteer of that character, I would probably fanboy a little bit, because I'm like, this is like, because as someone who has autism, that's a big deal. So to be represented in a great television series such as that's educational for children.
Yeah. To see yourself and to let other people see you in a potentially safe way. So yeah, no, that's amazing.
It's absolutely great. And congratulations to the entire cast and crew of Sesame Street and the Muppets. Whether you're still with us here on this earth or not, we miss you. We love you. We support everything that you're doing. So another piece I would like to share with you here, if we could. Pitter Patty Finds Another Day. How did this all come about, and what is it exactly? What's the elevator pitch?
So the elevator pitch is Pitter Patty Finds Another Day is about a lonely little rain cloud who's looking for a friend. And she's always being chased away by the meanest song ever written. And it's one that you've probably sung, Rain, Rain, Go Away. So she tries to do everything she can to be liked. She tries being friendly, but she's still raining on people, so they still run away from her. She tries studying other clouds who seem to be liked. And she says, well, people seem to like clouds that look like things. So she trains herself to look like a helicopter and a velociraptor and a lion and an elephant and a roller coaster with multiple loop-de-loops. But changing yourself doesn't make you liked. So that doesn't work. So she says, I'll deny myself. I won't be a rain cloud. And she holds her breath. And that works for a little while because it's not raining and people go out and they start playing. But the problem is if you deny yourself too long, lightning, and things get really messy. So then she says, I know, I'll go where people like water. But for some reason, no one wants rain at the beach. So I'll skip towards the end. It's a children's book, so it's not too much more anyway. She goes and goes and goes, and she thinks she finds herself in another beach, and she gets very sad. Except for that when people see her, they start dancing, and they start cheering, and they open up their arms because she's found her way to a desert, and she's found a place where people can love her for who she is and for what she does. And that's Pitter Patty Finds Another Day. And I honestly was over the moon. I should make a cloud reference, but I was over the moon when Dream Punk Press agreed to publish it last year in May. And they even sent me out to the American Library Association's National Book Show for it. And so I was sitting there with the authors from Scholastic and all the big guys. And it was incredible. And I don't think this will matter to the audience. I don't, and maybe it shouldn't matter to me, except for that we all have that part of ourselves, which is a self-doubter and self-critic. In my signing session, we ran out of books in 15 minutes. And that was just crazy. And I think the book, from what I can tell, and this is the difference between theater and prose or picture books in this case. You don't actually often get to see the visceral first blush reaction, has been really good. So hopefully Pitter Patty finds a lot of friends, maybe some with your audience who need a gift for their little ones, or someone who has a niece or a cousin or a grandchild. That would be cool, because I think we all need to be loved for who we are.
Well, that would certainly be a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. So
Nice.
Yeah, see, I took care of that for you.
You
Quite
did
well.
it.
Checks in the mail. Thank you. Appreciate it. And by the way, you mentioned Scholastic. I mean, I grew up like all of us. I think many of us did. We grew up going to Scholastic book fairs as children, getting all the books we could possibly find. Half of them we probably wouldn't even read. We just wanted them because the covers look nice. I may have been one of those victims, but it happens. But that's awesome. Next to people like Scholastic and all these other public, that is just congratulations on both of these. That is just fantastic stuff. And you got stuff for different audiences out there, and that's great. And yes, I do have a lot of friends and family who have little ones and things like that, so this book would particularly be an excellent. And hey, the holidays are right around that it'd be a little corner, so there you go. there's that
Not that we're crass or anything.
No, just because we're in the midst of the holiday season, get out of here. We're just thankful that you are here to watch or listen to this episode of And I Quote. We hope you're enjoying yourselves, quite frankly. So you mentioned something about telling stories. Now, we know that Rogue One has a great Star Wars story. We know that Solo never should have happened, but it happened anyway. No one asked for it. And Star Wars has told many stories for the last 45, almost going on 50 years. So a little birdie said that you have a Star Wars story. So what exactly is it?
So back when I was in the radio again, a man by the name of Bob Johnson died. Now, you running the Cantina podcast, the Nerd Cantina podcast, probably know who Bob Johnson is. Bob Johnson was the fight coordinator in the original 3 Star Wars movies. He also did Lord of the Rings. Back in the day, he did Princess Bride. Back in the day, he dueled Errol Flynn. Before that, he was a Royal Marine in World War II, somewhere in the middle of that. He was a gold medalist for England in the Olympics. So this was a guy who really knew his stuff when it comes to anything with swords. This is a story. After he died, I managed to make contact with Mark Hamill. And he tells me about the story of how the duel between Darth and Luke came about in Empire Strikes Back. And some people know this story, but a lot of people don't. So here goes. So the original conception for the duel between Luke and Darth was going to be a Bruce Lee ninja extravaganza. They imagined Luke doing wire work, one-handed sword spins, all sorts of stunts, crazy kicks, and wonderful effects. And Mark was all for it. He was like, no one's ever seen anything like this. It's going to be great. And then the first hiccup happened. They sent over the storyboards to the London Stuntsmen's Guild. And the London Stuntsmen's Guild said, this is wonderful, but we will not give our permission for any actor to do it. It's way too dangerous. Only a certified stunts person with the London Stuntsmen's Guild is allowed to do this kind of stuff. To which Mark Hamill said, well, what does it take to become a stuntman, a certified stuntman? And he did it, which his wife hated. Because for the next month and a half, every day he would come home with a new sprain, a new cut, a new contusion, because he'd never done sword work. He never even really did theatrical sword work. And so all of this was new to him. And he was killing himself trying to get ready for this bit, this scene that you have highlighted on the monitor. And eventually they get to the point where they're ready to show it, and they show it to Irving Kershner. And Irving loves it, director of Empire Strikes Back, for those who don't know. And he says, the only thing we got to do is we got to show it to George. George has to sign off on it. So they bring George Lucas in. And Mark's like, I was great. I only messed up like 5 times. I couldn't have done any better. But halfway through it, George is shaking his head. And when it ends, George stands up and says, no, none of it. We have to get rid of all of it. None of this can possibly work. To which Mark Hamill says, I quit. Because he's been killing himself for this month and a half, almost literally. He says, everyone knows the second movie's not as good. No one's going to care about a second Star Wars movie. And he starts railing and ranting and going crazy. And Bob pulls him off to the side, being the graybeard who's been through all these, movie wars between creatives. And he talks him down and says, okay, we need to find out why George doesn't like it, and we'll find a solution. So they go back to George and say, why doesn't this work? And this is one of the things that I think a lot of people don't know. So George Lucas looks at both of them and says, it doesn't work because lightsabers weigh 75 pounds. So you have to have 2 hands on them the whole time. And if you noticed in the first 3 movies, every sword fight, every lightsaber duel is done in sort of a Japanese kendo style. And that's why. And that's why the whole choreography had to be redone. Now, I don't buy that lightsabers weigh 75 pounds. But Mark Hamill wasn't the person to ask about that because he wasn't the writer and he wasn't the director. In my mind, the only way I can justify it is if there's a battle on the surface, the lightsaber duel, and a battle under the surface where we are telekinetically trying to rip the sword out of each other's hands. So maybe that would provide 75 or 100 or 500 pounds of force. But wasn't a question I thought in the moment to ask Mark. Not sure if he would have had an answer other than the fact that he was very upset. And he was actually still a little upset that George had changed his mind by the times of the prequels. And that in the prequels, they were doing one-handed sword spins and ninja moves and flips and all sorts of other things. And I think Mark still would have liked it to be him. So that is my Star Wars story.
Jeez, man, I mean, a lot of people have said over the years, and some people still think this to this day, that Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars movie that's ever been made. So it's their favorite Star Wars film. A lot of people say it's the best sequel ever made. It's still popular to this day, 40 plus years later. It's still getting people talking. It makes top 10 lists. Critics amongst all generations are still talking about it. And for a lot of people, it's their entry point into Star Wars is the original trilogy, whether they were there when it first arrived in 1980 or whether they were watching it on physical media or what is known as a streaming service, because we all know how popular streaming services are nowadays. So, man, but I mean, you look at the film now, it turned out pretty darn well. So,
oh, yeah.
I mean, the way the battle starts with them with both hands. I mean, Luke, I think he had both hands on it the first time, and then they go into further and further into the battle. It starts weighing on him a bit, so he starts using one hand, and then he gets this. Of course, we all know the hand chopped off sequence, and Vader's like, "You have nowhere to go. You're done. The battle's over. Don't make me destroy you." It's just, which, by the way, James Earl Jones's voice credit is his voice acting is so flipping good.
Yes.
In all three, but Empire particularly, he gets under your skin with taunting Luke and saying, "You're beaten. Just let it go. You're done. This whole thing is over. I've won. There's nothing you can. There's no way out of this." He says, "You're beaten. It is useless to resist." It's just Wish I could be a fly on the wall when they were filming that, even though it was long before my time. But hey, that's neither here nor there. Extraordinary story, and we thank you for sharing with us. Man, the behind-the-scenes drama, I guess, was real.
Yeah, and I think you'll find that with most pieces. Maybe not quite that dramatic. Maybe not. I'll quit. But the battles between producers and directors, between directors and actors, between writers and editors, there's always that moment of, where do I draw the line? What can't I give up? And what am I just being to quote a different nerd franchise, precious about? And I some of that. Luckily, I think most of the stories we know about or that we've read, probably the editor and the director and the producer wound up making a good choice. There are a couple where we've seen the director's cut, so to speak, and we've been like, ooh, okay, the producers were wrong. That extra 30 minutes or that extra scene that they didn't want. But a lot of the times, like you said, I grew up with Empire and loved it. And didn't miss the fact that Luke wasn't Bruce Lee, or he wasn't Daredevil, or he wasn't Spider-Man, or he wasn't, make your choice. It worked for me in that moment. And frankly, there's a probability that if Luke was Iron Fist jumping all over the place and cartwheeling and tumbling and flying through the air, and Vader is being his sort of stiff, menacing self, it might not have been as cool. Because how is Vader, who's kind of a plotter, at least in the original movies, going to handle that? And it's sort of like, to blaspheme a little bit, it's sort of like watching Yoda with a lightsaber. And it looked a little silly.
Yeah, that's a discussion that can be had for another time, I'm sure. Who knows? Maybe someone will bring it up on the Nerdy Cantina, which is on Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, where we discuss all things Star Wars. And we have fun with it, too. So to each their own. Yeah, Yoda, and a lot of people were saying back then, and even to this day, they say, if that puppet didn't work, then Empire, like the Star Wars franchise, would have been in trouble. Because if Yoda isn't working and people can't be convinced that this small creature, this little creature with pointy ears, the gray hair, the whole nine doesn't work, then we're going to be lost. And luckily, thankfully, the character works. Frank Oz is incredible. Always has been, always will be. No matter what he does, what he touches turns to gold. He's directed films. He's done a million different things in his respective career. But when he's Yoda, you listen. You're on. So,
And, yeah.
I mean, judge me by my size, do you? Not this crude matter. It's just, and everyone quotes Yoda every day. I don't care what anybody says. If you have no idea what Star Wars is, someone out there knows who Yoda is. They just do.
Yeah, I think it was just for me, and I won't get lost in this because Lord knows we all love our Star Wars.
Well, that's true.
They called them Jedi Knights.
That's
and
true.
my little Dungeons and Dragons brain said, well, if there's a Jedi Knight, there's probably a Jedi magic user. There's probably a Jedi druid. So for me, Yoda wouldn't have been on his horse with a lance as a knight. He's using the Force. That's how he would engage in battle if he needed to be. He was the sage and the wizard. He wasn't the foot soldier. So that's just me.
No, it's very true. It's very true. Lifts the X-Wing out of the swamp, when Luke can't do it. He says, you want the impossible. And then he lifts it up. Everything is right as rain, at least with, him pulling it out of the waters or the swamp, I think it is, respectively. And Luke says, I don't believe it. That is why you fail.
Which is a great line.
Like you have to believe. You gotta just roll with it. You can't question it. You can't doubt it. It just is what it is. The Force is everywhere. It lives within every object and every fiber of your being. Even humans have it. You just got to learn how to harness it. And that's why Yoda is so flippin' awesome. If you have any Yoda collectibles, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the chat. Be curious to hear your thoughts. Because Lord knows there's a lot of Yoda swag out there. So have at it. And I'm sure people have cosplayed as that character for years. So no shame in that. By the way, if people put on the makeup and everything, more power to you, because that is not an easy thing to do. It takes skill. So I digress. Aside from the incredible stories that you've shared with us, and once again, we are here with the incredible Andrew Hiller on And I Quote. Don't forget to like and share this with everyone you know. Have there been any special memories for you from being at conventions or other events, whether you were there as a vendor or there as an attendee, that you haven't shared with us yet?
So let me share this story. This story is about a climbing stock, which we haven't mentioned yet. But I was at a convention, and on Friday, someone decided to buy a climbing stock, which is a fractured fairy tale, a humorous fantasy, basically Jack and the Beanstalk in the stock market. And he gets the book, and I don't think too much about it until Saturday morning. I see the same guy approaching me. And he's stomping, and his face is kind of red. And he says, "Damn you!" And I'm like, "What?" And he says, "I'm halfway through your book." And I realized his "damn you" was he spent the whole night up reading my book. And he loved it that much. And I have kept that moment with me that, because I've had that moment where you read a book and you can't stop. You're like, okay, this is the last chapter. Except for that, you go on to the next chapter. And then the next chapter. And you look at the clock as it ticks towards 2 or 3 in the morning. And you're like, but it's good. And to know that I had that impact on someone was pretty amazing. So I think that's the story I'll share.
Wow. Okay. Never. It's the first time for everything. Someone walking up to you at a booth and saying, "Damn you!" Like, okay, that's new. No. But crazier things have happened at conventions. We all have stories. That's the beauty of life. Well, great stuff. And I want to let you know here, for you who may be watching or listening to this, and for you, Andrew, that this episode is powered by our good friends at Poddex. Now, Poddex are the hottest new tool for podcasters looking to have more meaningful conversations or gamify their podcast. You simply shuffle up the cards, you ask a question, and you let the content roll. Get yours today at poddex.com. Make sure you use that promo code RYAN10. That's RYAN10 for 10% off your order. Check out our friends over there at poddex.com. So Poddex wants to know, If you were what is known as a bartender, which famous person would you like to serve a drink to?
Oh, wow. Okay, so if we were going into the world of theater, where I started, it would probably be Tim Rice, the man who wrote Jesus Christ Superstar and Evita and Chess and musicals of that sort. If it was in the world of science fiction, trying to think of someone I actually haven't gotten a chance to meet, which sounds presumptuous. I would really love to hang out with a drink with, let's say, Steven Spielberg. That would be kind of cool. I'd also love to, although he's passed, and I'm going to try to be pulling a name that's not quite coming to me, the Discworld, Terry Pratchett. That would be pretty fun. Similarly, Doug Adams. Modern authors also. Adrian Tchaikovsky, who wrote Children of Time. Would love to dig into how he came into that, how he sort of views the sociology and the adventure of science fiction, and how he wove it so perfectly. Those would be some of the ones I haven't met that come off to the top of my head. As soon as this video ends, I will have a list of 30 others. And because, I mean, you know, even people like Brit Veed, who is the editor at Orbit Books, who's been behind N.K. Jemison's books and a whole bunch of other books that have just been fantastic. And I'd love to bend her ear about how she breaks down a book. So, you know, the behind the scenes people that we don't know the names of, they'd be pretty amazing to me too. And I think you know this. Sometimes the star is not as cool as the person holding the boom mic, or the person mixing the audio, or the person figuring out how to make it work, how to make the star a star. So it probably would be someone whose name I don't know, who did amazing work that affected me deeply.
Wow. Really good picks. If I were to serve a drink to Spielberg, I'd ask him, so when are you going to direct something in the Star Wars galaxy? You've been avoiding it for 50 years. You going to do something about it before you pass on? Because you're not getting any younger here, Steve. You know, Star Wars could use you. You know, you've done some great stuff with other coming of age stories, so you can do a coming of age story in the Star Wars galaxy. We know you can do it. Yeah.
It would be interesting to see Steven Spielberg nowadays in the streaming that we talked about earlier, taking on something serialized. So not something in a 2-hour chunk or 2.5-hour chunk, but something where he could really have the sort of meteor character building that we see like in Andor or in Kenobi, or one of those where we're really doing a character study that allows us to explore it without having immediately to go to the action scene, immediately go into the, you know, big special effects extravaganza, but actually care about the story and the plot and the politics and the dynamics. That could be fun.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be totally down for that. I mean, heck, you can do a series about the faces that come through the cantina and what their businesses are, what their characters are like, you know, because the slither of stuff that we've seen in the Star Wars galaxy has just been the cantina band playing some good tunes, guys getting his arms chopped off, guys getting, you know, stabbed through the heart because he keeps bothering the patrons, right? He says he doesn't like you. I'm sorry, I don't like you either. You just watch yourself. Anyway, I can quote that all day long. We don't have that kind of time. It's a great movie. If you've never seen it, look up Star Wars. It's been popular for the last almost 50 years. But But Poddex wants to know this. What was the most memorable class you've ever taken in school or at college?
Cultural psychology, maybe? Maybe? That's a really tough question. There's a study that I still remember, and I still quote, and there were two parts of it. I'll do the marijuana one first, and tell me if I'm getting short on time. In which these scientists got a group of Vietnam War veterans. And according to self-report, while they were in theater in Vietnam, they were smoking marijuana all the time to reduce the stress, to be able to deal with everything they were dealing with. When they got home, they stopped, and it was easy to stop. No withdrawal, no temptation, nothing. They just stopped. In this experiment, they put them on a plane and they flew them back to Hanoi. And the moment they got off the plane, the moment they debarked and they smelled that humidity and they tasted that air, they started shaking. And they really needed something to calm their nerves. All the need for that drug came back to them because of the environmental stimuli that was around them. I thought that was pretty interesting. The other one that was really cool was there was this study of these people in Africa, in a very remote part of Africa, that had not really been introduced to written language or written things. They had ceramics, but they hadn't had books. They didn't have photography. They didn't have access to what we consider technology. And they showed them a photograph. And because they had never seen a photograph, their eyes weren't able to find people in them. It was just a mishmash of color. It was just crazy. But the brain is fast enough that if you outlined a face, if you outlined the body, that would pop out to them and they could suddenly see it. They could suddenly perceive it. And the wiring of the brain and the way we construct reality is, I think, what was really fascinating to me. I don't know if that's the answer you needed. That's the class that pops out.
No, that's fair. It's completely fair. It's whatever comes to mind, or however you want to answer the question is up to the individual. So there you go. No problems with that. If you had to lose one of your 5 senses, which one would you give up? 5 senses. You had to give up one of them.
If I had to give up a sense. Smell?
Okay.
And I don't know that I have a great reason.
It's okay.
Smell is too closely associated with taste, so that would be a drag. Not to be able to experience pleasure from what I'm eating and what I'm experiencing that way. But I wouldn't want to lose sense of touch because I'd be afraid of being injured and not knowing it, and that becoming crazy. Very sight dependent, as someone who worked in radio, very audio dependent. I think I would miss taste. The best answer is one that I could get artificially replaced the moment it's lost.
There you go. There you go.
It's the Star Trek thing.
Yeah, it's
the
a way to
best answer is to cheat.
Yep. It's a way to work around it, I should say. So
yeah.
There you go. What Poddex wants to know. What's the first impression that you want to give people?
In what environment?
This is speaking in general.
I think the first impression I want to give people is that I'm listening and that I'm present. Probably that I care. Secondary to that would probably be, I'd want them to think that I was funny or that I had something worth hearing. You know, that my thoughts had weight, had matter. I think that would be my answer.
There you go. Awesome. No need for lifelines, Regis. Final answer. Final answer. You just won $1 million. Anyway, I'm just kidding. We don't have real money like
You
that.
didn't tell. Oh,
I wish we did. I wish we did, but we don't. I'm sorry. I mean, you know,
it would make writing so much easier if I had $1 million.
it would make right. Yeah, exactly. I would totally agree with that. And reading books or writing them, depending on how you look at it, can be fun. So, and if you love what you do, it's not called work. So there you are. Now, Poddex is very curious about this. If you were in charge, what 3 specific items would you have in the office vending machine?
So I'm a weirdo and will not choose coffee. It's my mom's fault, but that's okay. That's a story for another day. Actually, it's an incident with coffee when I was 3. But that's okay. All right, we'll tell the story. When I was 3 years old, my mom was drinking coffee. She drinks it black. And like most 3-year-olds, I was curious. So I said, can I try that? My mom said, yes, but you won't like it. I said, can I try it anyway? She said, here. I drink it. And I spit it out because I'm 3. And I say, you like that? And she said something that has resonated with me my entire life. She said, no one likes coffee. We just get used to it. And so every time I have tried to drink coffee since, that little voice comes into my head and says, why do I want to get used to something I don't like? So it wouldn't have that. So in my vending machine, I would not have coffee, but I would probably have pencils. I would probably have some kind of fruit juice. And I would probably have, actually, maybe. And I would probably have batteries. So those would be the 3 things.
Awesome-tacular batteries that just keep going and going and going, as the commercial likes to tell us from time to time. And if it doesn't work, if that thing doesn't air on television anymore, I pity you, because that commercial was very catchy and it could convince people to buy your product, whatever it may be.
And George says we need a rabbit in our lives.
Yeah, is that what they say? Is that what he says? Wow. I was, in the words of a fictional character, I was not aware of that. So this has been fascinating, and it's been educational. Having the incredible Andrew Hiller, author and artist, on this episode of And I Quote. We hope you enjoy this. Andrew, it has been great having you here and hearing all the wonderful things that you've done, some of the wonderful people that you've had a chance to meet over the course of time. Thank you for being with us. Now, if a person is watching or listening to this and they want to follow you and maybe even purchase some of those wonderful things called books of yours that are magical and fascinating, to say the least, where can they follow you on social media?
So I'm on Blue Sky. I'm still on Twitter. You can find me at either of those. You can find me on my website, which is andrewhiller.net, N-E-T, one word, Andrew Hiller. For Pitter Patty, if you want to get it, if you're a non-Amazon person, and you can get it through Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, all those bookstores. You can also go straight to the publisher, dreampunkpress.com. dreampunkpress.com. And I think those would be the main ways to reach me. And possibly some Discord and Slack channels, which I don't know if you'll have access to or not.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. Well, we thank you for being here with us, Andrew. It has been absolutely spectacular. I'm going to talk to you here again here in just a moment. My name is Ryan of Neuroculture. Feel free to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RyanRPM5. Check out all the wonderful things we got coming up because we are this close, my good friends, to hitting 1,000 subscribers. Once we do, we're going to throw a great big live stream celebration. It's going to include returning guests, some surprise guests, and some special giveaways for you, our incredible fans/subscribers. And Andrew Hiller is more than welcome to join us on that special episode when that celebration has been planned and we release the details to the general public. We have some prints here from the art of John Pinto that you're going to be eligible to win. Speaking of Dark Lords of the Sith, look at this bad boy. 11 by 17 prints that we're going to be sending straight to your door, including the Dark Lord of the Sith known as Darth Vader, James Earl Jones, one of the best actors and best voice actors of all time. I think Andrew and I would agree on that front. Star Trek, Strange New Worlds. You can end up winning this print and take it home with you. Put it up on your wall, put it up in your office, make all your office mates or your friends and family members jealous. Parker, I need those pictures now. Spider-Man going up against Green Goblin in Queens, New York with the Daily Bugle. You'd be eligible to win that. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of some of the incredible items that you're going to be eligible to win for special giveaways. Also, like we were talking about earlier, the Nerdy Cantina is coming back on Tuesday, November the 21st at Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on all our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, of course. The Meaning of Fandom is going to be coming back pretty soon, so stay tuned to our social media on that. That's where we gather a roundtable of special guests, and we ask them what a particular character or fandom means to them and why. We have such heartfelt and spirited discussions on that, so that is going to be a lot of fun. So those are some of the great, incredible things coming your way very soon. Movie anniversary watch-alongs will be continuing on in the month of December, so stay tuned for those. All the links to where you can find these things as well as where you can pick up incredible books by Andrew Hiller are located in the description of this episode. So check out those links and like, comment, share, subscribe, ring that bell to be notified of when our videos go up or they go live. And remember, life is better when reading because all you got to do is take a look. It's in a book. Take a look at this.
Famous Faces and Funnies in Melbourne, Florida is leading the way in pop culture fun. From comic books and graphic novels to Funko Pops and collector's items, Famous Faces and Funnies has it all. Rick Shea and the professional team at Famous Faces and Funnies are friendly and knowledgeable. Whether you're looking for toys, props, collector treasures, or a new comic book, Famous Faces and Funnies is your one-stop shop. To find Famous Faces and Funnies on Facebook and Twitter, just type at FFF Comics.
Author Cindy Kep is writing on the edge. Books include Remnant in the Stars, The Loudest Actions, Lines of Succession, Mindstorm, Condemned Courier, the Yerushalayim series, and Animal Eye. Find author Cindy Kep at CKOEPP.com today.
You've worked hard and written a great book. Now it's time to give it a great cover. If you're an indie author or small press publisher, Plasmafire Graphics is your source for affordable cover illustration and graphic design. Plasmafire Graphics, when the look of your book matters to you.
Good morning. Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.